trying to say hi.
Hi. Welcome to the Cato, Sadie, and Sam show.
With your host, Neil.
Actually, welcome to the THC show. A little more casual now. We got those first 200 shows under my belt now. I can relax. Don't have to be so formal. We can fool around a little bit if we want to. I'm just joking, but this is show number 201 of the THC show. So that sounds amazing to me. I'm not sure how that all happened. I probably slept through the most of them. But anyway, welcome to the show, and thanks for tuning in. I guess I'll light this. Typically I get this lit ahead of time, but like I said, we're a little more casual today. Cannabis, gotta love it. It's what it's all about, really, isn't it? This ridiculous hypocrisy in our world where our forefathers have fought for millennia to gain rights against the elite of this world. Numerous different watersheds along the way where different things have happened and different rights have been granted and this and that. Instead of all kings and pharaohs, we ended up with a little bit of democracy, supposedly. And here we have democracy in Canada that's supposed to be this tolerant, wonderful place with all these public servants, and we got it all figured out here and the people are all free. And that's not the case. The hypocrisy is rampant. Criminal hypocrisy. If we were really free people and we had public servants as those in governance supplying us with what we need for ourselves and just looking after to make sure we're safe and educated and everything, then the cannabis plant would not be the focus of prohibition. Or at this point, over-regulation, although prohibition is still alive and well in Canada. Big time. We wanted to end prohibition. I remember the sign that Jody was carrying that day. I mentioned it last week on the show and I couldn't quite get it, but it was politicians in favor of prohibition support organized crime. And that is exactly what's going on, and that's exactly what they've been doing for 100 years here in Canada. Those politicians like prime ministers and justice ministers and those police chiefs and the mayors and all of these people throughout the last 100 years have done their part to make sure that prohibition continues because it supports their friends, those people involved in organized crime. It was easier back in the day. People were a lot more gullible. Nobody really knew much about it. So they started off by telling some pretty huge lies down in the States about it. It was all about a number of different things. It wasn't any one thing in particular, but there were different groups that were benefiting from the demonization and the prohibition of cannabis. It was a way to put down minorities. It was a way to protect the interests of those that had competing products with what cannabis could supply. It was a way to make sure that people weren't using cannabis to open their minds and think about things like taxes and wars and things like that. So they lied through their teeth. You couldn't have told a bigger lie, and I guess they understood that if you're going to tell a lie, tell a big lie. Got a better chance of getting away with it. So they took this plant that for thousands of years had been coveted by different groups and cultures around the world. Used in religious ceremonies, used as medicine, used as an industrial product. It was the basis of wars being fought at different times. It was currency at different points in our history of human beings here. Never really hurt anybody. Sure, you could green out from the concentrates, and there's been concentrates for a long time. It's been hundreds of years that they've understood about getting the trichomes and the resin glands off of the cannabis plant and compressing them together into hashes and things. And there's been some pretty damn potent hashes, for sure. The real potent stuff, not completely. I mean, I don't even like to use the word safe, because, you know, cannabis is a really safe commodity compared to anything else. Greening out is not unsafe, unless you green out and pass out and whack your head on a rock on the way down or something. Cannabis, of all the different plants in nature, is not only one of the best, but it's one of the safest. So the level of hypocrisy involved in public servants in a free country deciding they are all right to use the criminal law to make sure nobody's using this plant has got to be one of the biggest crimes against humanity ever, and one of the most obvious and outrageous crimes. I mean, how much more information do we need? The studies are all there. They've been there for a long time now. In fact, they knew back in the 60s that there was no justification for using the criminal law against people wanting to grow, sell, or use the cannabis plant. But it didn't matter. It didn't matter because rich people were getting richer on its prohibition. And it was pretty well entrenched by the 60s. The lies had all been told for generations, and most of the people bought it. The religious community decided somehow it was the devil's weed, and that God wouldn't want you to use it. So they were on board with prohibition. Those people that had patentable products that cannabis could be used for didn't want it in the marketplace, lobbied for prohibition. Biggest of those would be the pharmaceutical companies. Cannabis is amazing medicine. I think we've learned that as a world over the last 10, 15 years at least. I mean, they've known it for hundreds of years. It's part of the pharmacopoeia in numerous cultures around the world and has been the go-to for a long time for many healers. But the pharmaceutical companies see it as nothing but competition. People can just grow their own, take off the extracts, use it in any way they want. Not hard to grow, not hard to consume, not hard to target what you're using it for. I'm sure it strikes fear in the pharmaceutical companies. I'm sure it does. But it's still not right what they've done. It's still not right that they decide that they're going to try to annihilate the competition by coercing the governments of the day to use the biggest tool in their toolbox to try to scare people and harm people out of wanting to have anything to do with the plant. Not to mention the lies. The lies well entrenched by media that also had vested interests in cannabis not being in the marketplace. The media was what everybody trusted. And there wasn't fake news and alternate news and mainstream news and all the rest of that. There was just the mainstream media for all of these decades leading up to this. And the mainstream media told terrible stories about how cannabis caused people to be violent and insane, was addictive. They even decided in the United States to put it in Schedule 1, meaning that it had no chance of ever being used in any positive medicinal way. Well, nothing could be further from the truth, right? Talk about telling a big lie. We've unraveled all of that. Now it's known very well to be medicine. We have numerous doctors, although certainly not the majority because they're all part of the big pharmaceutical gang. But we have many, many doctors who are okay with cannabis, who have done their part to allow their patients to have access to it. There should be no more of the lies in our society. It should have been well established shortly after those commissions that happened in the 60s, both in the States and here, that cannabis is a natural medicinal herb that should not have any criminal sanctions used against it or people that would have anything to do with it. That was established very clearly. Years-long, $1 million plus studies by the governments, and that's what the conclusions were. Yet there was never an apology. When those commissions released their reports, there was no immediate ending of the prohibition. It's taken another 60 years for there to be at least an admission by governments that, well, I guess you can have it. It can't be that bad. I mean, we'll allow for some legalization. Hell, we'll even be the ones in charge of distribution. So now these governments that have spent 100 years wasting billions of tax dollars trying to make sure that nobody used cannabis, because, man, that shit's dangerous. They almost a 360, but not quite. They did more like a 240. They came around and said, oh, yeah, okay, well, I guess we'll legalize it, but we still want to protect the children, and we don't want to apologize, and we don't want to make any admissions about it having actual medical value. But, yeah, we get it, where the public's interest is not in having full-blown prohibition anymore. They really do want legalization. In Canada, the public wanted legalization so much that they were, excuse me, that they voted for the young Trudeau, the ex-kindergarten teacher, who came out and said, we're not just going to legalize for medical people, we're going to legalize for everybody. And the medical people won't have to worry because they'll be taken care of in real legalization. And the unregulated marketplace, that'll just disappear because we're just going to have better weed at better prices than any of that can happen. So everybody's going to want to go to the stores and not go to their local dealer anymore. More lies. No apology. But legalization, so they called it. So many people around the world, many people in Canada thought, hey, weed's legal now. It's over. We finally got our way. We got stores now. Don't have to worry about getting arrested. Except for those people that were growing and selling cannabis. They weren't so sold on the idea. And in fact, more than that, it was their own self-interest. Everything's about everybody's own self-interest. So the self-interest of the growers and the sellers was, that's been their income for a while. That's how they pay their rent and their mortgage and feed their families. So legalization for them, well, it kind of meant a real step backwards or two in what they were able to do to live their lives. So as they mulled it over and thought about it, most of them decided, well, hey, I'm not going to stop growing cannabis, and I'm not going to stop selling cannabis just because now the government says that's illegal. Because it was illegal before legalization. They're not going to stop the money coming in that they need to live their lives when nothing has changed for them. Sure, the government did increase penalties, potentially, if you get caught. They added more dollars to the enforcement arm of things to make sure more people got caught. Still not enough to deter most people who were pretty much entrenched in their lifestyle and their businesses. But that just was fine with the government. In fact, that was part of their plan. They didn't want everybody to stop growing and selling cannabis. They didn't want everybody to use the government stores, because that would put a whole lot of their friends out of business. That would stop the money train coming in from numerous different locations to numerous different people. So the government and their cronies, like, it's not just the public servants that got around and decided how to bring in legalization. It was the government and their actual masters, the corporate and financial heavyweights, probably the gangs, those guys in suits that are at the top of the gangs that didn't want their fortunes to end. So they came up with a legalization scheme that allows for the average person to have weed. If you want to buy it, you have to buy it off of them. But there's still going to be a lot of people going to the underground marketplace because it's cheaper and people trust it more. And that's fine with the government. That's why they added penalties. That's why they added enforcement dollars. Because they don't want that end to stop. That gravy train that are stopping in those locations wasn't about to stop. And they knew it. They could have ended the underground marketplace, or at least the vast majority of it, if they had brought in proper cannabis at proper prices and included people properly in the whole scheme. Easy to transition into a licensed grower. No major regulations that would cripple you and not allow you to make money on it. They could have done it if they wanted to, but you just know they didn't want to. You just know that some of those financial and corporate heavyweights were not going to be happy with that. They saw a cash cow that they could milk for a long time into the future. And so we get a form of legalization where the one big gang, the new gang in town, gets to come in and pretty much take over at least the storefronts. Because before legalization, we had a fair amount of storefronts going on in Canada. Illegal, unlicensed, although the city of Vancouver had figured out a licensing scheme for some of these places. Not a great one. They did it knowing that legalization was coming down the road, and they just wanted to get ready for it. And they did it in a fashion that was going to mix with the legalization that we were being offered. But the new big gang in town, the Trudeau cartel, comes in, sets up what is now thousands of stores across Canada, allows provinces to be in charge of their distribution of cannabis, licenses a whole bunch of big corporations to build super greenhouses and grow an incredible amount of cannabis. For the first 12 months of legalization, there wasn't enough cannabis to stock their stores. For the last 3 years, there's been overproduction, way too much. So many of these companies have gone under, many of them have taken over. There's large greenhouses and warehouses sitting empty. There's warehouses that have cannabis in them that they can't sell.